support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. All right, folks. Mayoral races are happening all across the country. We, of course, spent some time in St. Louis with Tashara Jones, who's elected mayor there. New York City has a huge race that's coming up, all about to replace Bill de Blasio. The primary will take place on June 22nd. General election on November 2nd. One of the folks who is running to take over for de Blasio is Ray McGuire. He joins us right now. Ray, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Dr. Martin, how you getting along today?
Doing great, doing great. It is a packed field. A lot of people who are jumped in this particular race. Last polling I saw had you still in single digits. How are you going to break through? What is the messaging that you're going to lay out to reach voters there to come out on top?
So first, let me acknowledge that the highest vote getter today is undecided. So I am actively out talking to undecided with what is the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback plan in the history of this city. My platform includes the following: it's the economics. The comeback plan is 500,000 jobs. Go big, go small, go forward. It is safety and justice, and it's education. And when I go out and communicate this to New Yorkers in the boroughs, in the subway stations, in the cathedrals, in the mosque, in the churches, and in the synagogues, people are responding. In the subway stations. So people are responding. People want something different. You know, I haven't been termed out. I haven't served in any administrations, especially any failed administrations. I haven't run for office, and I'm not looking for promotions. So people want something different. They want somebody who's got a track record. And if I go out and they understand the arc of my story and the plan that I have for the comeback in this city, people are responding. So I'm quite confident with the momentum that we have. I am inspired by those who have stepped up to say, I am the right person to lead this city, not only those who have profile, but those who have no profile. So I'm confident that on June 22nd...
You see the arc of my...
Yeah.
You see the arc of my story. What is that story? What is that story?
You know, where I started, Roland, I started at the bottom, right? I was raised by my single mother. I didn't know my dad. At any point in time, my mother worked 3 jobs, and then she became a social worker. And my mother, along with my grandparents, raised me and my 2 brothers, along with half a dozen foster children. So I know what it's like not to have. I know what it's like to struggle. And based on my mother's sacrifices, I was able to leave home when I was 16. I took a Greyhound bus around New England by myself, looking for education. There's a teacher who said, if you're as good as they say you are here, go test yourself against the big boys and girls in the East. So I took a Greyhound bus around at 16 years old, looking for schools, landed at a school in Connecticut where I got to the school. You know, my classmates had on those short sleeve shirts with alligators, cost more than my entire wardrobe. And I was able to do okay there. And I applied to colleges and got into college, went to Harvard College and then on to Harvard Law School and Harvard Business School. So I came to New York City with 3 things. I came with a great education, I came with a lot of debt, and I came with no money. And so people understand that when they understand that I started at the bottom and had to kick down doors and make certain that I performed at the highest levels and stayed in my job longer than anybody else in the history of corporate finance, in the history of the world, in the history of the corporate world, 13 years longer than anybody else.
Are you concerned, though, that that not enough people are hearing that story and instead they just say, oh, here's a Wall Street dude trying to buy himself into the mayoral office?
You know, people will say that. Yeah, I've heard that, you know, and what that does is it ignores a journey. I didn't just parachute into this, but I had to face conscious and unconscious bias to get here. And so, yeah, I am a 6'4", 200-pound black man who's been on Wall Street and quite proud of it, quite candidly, given my mother's sacrifices. And at any point in time, given the crisis that we're in now, this city is broken and divided, and all the others had their chance, and black and brown people have gone backwards. So somebody who's been in the room, who's made the investment in the community, who's made certain that others got the opportunity, I extended the ladder the way the civil rights leaders extended the ladder to me. I have likely created more opportunity and more wealth for black and brown people than all the other candidates combined. In the neighborhood I come up in, you know what they call that? They call that receipts. So I get receipts.
What would you say is the most fundamental issue, or the top two fundamental issues that you will do specifically for black voters in New York City? New York has the largest concentration of black voters than any other city in America. They certainly will play a huge role in who wins this election.
So, Roland, there are two fundamental things that need to take place here. One is the economy, and the other is the education that gets us into the economy. We got to transform the educational system now, not the random pre-K to 12, but we need to make certain that our children can get an education, that their lives shouldn't be determined by their zip codes. I have a plan, which is my Cradle to Career plan at rayformayor.com. That's education, which I'm going to fundamentally transform that. And then when it gets to the economy, you get educated. And if you don't have the education, I have workforce training as part of my comeback plan. Then when it gets to the economy, I'm going to be intentional on how we manage a budget. And oh, by the way, I'm the only person here who's managed budgets larger than most state budgets and been held accountable and had to identify, attract, and retain the talent as I led from the great financial recession, where our company was on life support, built the business out of that financial recession. And today, if I look at New York City, we spent $22.5 billion last year. 82%, 8 out of 10 of the MWBEs got zero. So I will be intentional here. And intentional is the same way that Harold Washington was intentional in Chicago, or Coleman Young was intentional in Detroit, or Maynard Jackson was intentional in Atlanta. I'm going to take those playbooks, I'm going to modernize them, and make certain that we get what we need. And so let me give you something, the way I think about this. We've been outside for so long that when they give us crumbs, they want us to feel full. I'm not interested in the crumbs. Matter of fact, I ain't interested in the cake. I'm interested in us owning the bakeries, which is how I have led my career, and the investments I've made in black and brown entrepreneurs, making sure that people got educated, making sure that they got jobs, they got promoted, got position responsibilities, and got paid. So it's education and the economy.
All right. Well, Ray, your folks told me you got a hard out at 7:55. I wish we had more time with you. So we certainly, I got a lot more questions. I'm sure my panel has questions as well. So hopefully we can get you back on and for a longer period of time to talk about your mayoral race and what you want to accomplish.
I appreciate you, and a lot of respect and admiration for all you do. Your leadership is exemplary. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to returning.
I appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.
Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Oh, folks, New York City is having the mayoral campaign, the election taking place, and there are a ton of candidates in the race. One of those is the former HUD Secretary under President Barack Obama, Shaun Donovan, also former New York housing official. He wants to replace Bill de Blasio as the next mayor of New York City. He joins us right now. Shaun, glad to have you on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Had you on Washington Watch on TV1 several times, so glad to have you back.
Many times. It is great to see you again, Roland. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, so let's get right to it. So I'm sitting here. I've been crazy busy with advertising stuff all day. And then we had to, so I'm seeing these stories. All the folks saying, wait a minute, what's this, all this stuff about housing and not knowing the cost of median housing in Brooklyn? What's up with that?
You know, we are having a race here in New York, Roland, that is about how to make housing affordable, right? This is the thing that I hear every day. You know this. I've spent 30 years of my career working to make housing affordable, and we've seen the last 8 years under Mayor de Blasio an explosion in homelessness in this city. We've seen gentrification. We've seen so many things that are at the center of what needs to change and why we need new leadership in this city. And that's the work that I put at the center of my career for 30 years, going back to growing up in this city and watching homelessness explode on the streets, watching the South Bronx burn, and working with Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood and the East Brooklyn congregations to build the Nehemiah homes. All of that is work that I've done that I think is so important at this moment when you're exactly right, when housing is at the center of what New Yorkers are concerned about.
Gentrification is also one of those issues, and that's a issue that black folks have been talking about. Speaking of Brooklyn, how the cost is shot up, folks being moved out of areas, Brooklyn, Harlem, and others as well. And so, as mayor, how do you deal with that? Where, let's just be honest, where you have whites moving into areas that were previously occupied by black African Americans and Hispanics. All of a sudden, you begin to see new resources and new facilities in those areas, but folks who've lived there being priced out. How do you change that? How do you stop that? How do you fix that if you're mayor of New York City?
Well, first, you got to make sure that folks can stay. And, you know, I mentioned a moment ago, I started my career when I learned about the work that Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood was doing with East Brooklyn congregations in Brownsville and East New York. And what we did was build more than 5,000 Nehemiah homes that allowed folks to buy their first home. And if you go back and look after 30 years of the way that wealth that they've built has not only changed their lives, but their children's lives, their grandchildren's lives, this is exactly why I'm proposing equity bonds. You know, some of my opponents in the race say we should give a few $100s a month to a few New Yorkers and that's going to solve poverty. I know that on average, a white family has 10 times the wealth than a black family does in this city. And that's why I'm proposing equity bonds, building on the work that Cory Booker did with baby bonds. What I'm proposing is that every child born in the city would get $1,000, and every year until they graduate high school, up to another $2,000 more. That means a kid born into poverty in this city would graduate with almost $50,000 in an account to be able to buy a home, to go to college, to start a business. And it is really that wealth gap that is the primary driver of so much of the inequality in the city. And that would certainly allow folks to stay in their communities and actually benefit from revitalization, to make sure that revitalization happens with them and for them, not to them. And that's a cornerstone of what I'm proposing as mayor.
What about the issue that we're still seeing, the racial disparity in the top schools in New York City? That has been a point of contention. You've had Asian parents, white parents, not happy at all with Mayor Bill de Blasio, who's been trying to diversify those schools. Many of these schools that used to have a significant number of black students, now those numbers are low as all get out. And so how do you deal with that? Because if you're saying education is the issue, the problem is if you're black and Hispanic and you're getting shut out of New York City's top public schools, you're in the same problem your parents are in.
Absolutely. And look, you said low is all get out, Roland. Let's be clear, fewer than 10 black students the last few years in each of the new classes at Stuyvesant. And that has to change. Part of this is we have to make sure that folks can live wherever they choose in New York. The segregation in our neighborhoods is a root cause of the segregation in our schools. And you know this, we talked about it a number of times. I led the work for President Obama on fair housing. And, you know, I don't know if you remember, Donald Trump, when he still had a Twitter account, was attacking my work, saying we were trying to destroy the suburbs, racist attacks, because I was trying to make sure people could live wherever they choose. So one foundational piece of this is solving the segregation and discrimination in our neighborhoods, but then we have to solve it in our schools as well. Part of this is really making sure that we are getting rid of the screens and tests that are screening out too many Black and brown kids from the best schools. But also, we need to make sure that we're creating real opportunities for a more diverse set of teachers in New York. You know, Roland, all the information we have shows that if you're a kid of color and you have a teacher of color by 3rd grade, you're much more likely to graduate. And yet, in a system that's 85% kids of color in New York, we only have 45% teachers of color. That has to change. I've got a range of other plans as well that would do this, but we've got to solve this issue. There is no equity in New York without solving this challenge in our schools, just like you've said.
Speaking of schools, you've got a lot of parents there who are on waiting lists for charter schools. They want to see those slots open up. You've got folks in Albany who oppose the expansion. Do you believe, are you going to listen to those parents, listen to the demand, and say and agree with the expansion of high quality charter schools in New York City?
Roland, I've said again and again, I'm for good schools. And just like you said, we're seeing real demand for charters in many communities, particularly Black and brown communities. And we should not let politics stand in the way of ensuring parents can get a good education for their kids. Let's be clear. We have some charters that are struggling too, and we ought to hold all our schools to high standards of excellence. But if there's demand and we're seeing many good charter schools in New York, we ought to make sure that they're available. But here's the other thing, Roland, I would really want to focus on. You know, the single most powerful way you can predict a kid's life chances, even their life expectancy in New York, is the zip code they grow up in. And so it's not just more good schools, it's making sure every New Yorker has within 15 minutes of their front door a great school for their kids. That's part of my 15-minute neighborhood plan that would fundamentally change the inequity in our neighborhoods. And I would make sure it's not just a school, but it's a great job to support your family, transportation, the healthcare you need, get a COVID test, get a vaccine, deal with the underlying disparities in health that disproportionately devastated Black and brown communities with COVID. So fresh food, a park where you can exercise, all of the things that are needed for a life of health and opportunity, we should make sure every New Yorker has within 15 minutes of their front door. And that's a centerpiece of my equity agenda when I'm mayor.
Questions, one question each from each one of my panelists. I'll start with you, Mustafa. Your question for Shaun Donovan.
Yeah, Shaun, good to see you. My question for you is, there are a number of environmental justice impacts that are happening in New York City. Asthma is one example. About 14% of the adults there, and of course a great percentage of the young people, which creates its own set of challenges for folks. How will you begin to address some of both the environmental injustices that are happening and the climate crisis that New York has had to deal with, especially with some of the storms that continue to get stronger and stronger?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And unfortunately, as someone who's led through crisis after crisis, I've seen this, that those who are the most vulnerable before the crisis hits are always hurt the worst by it. I saw this when I had to clean up the mess that President Bush had created after Katrina, when we started under President Obama. I saw it after Sandy. And what we need to do is make sure that we're leading with protecting the communities that are most vulnerable. This is what we did after Sandy. Public housing, so many different communities that were hard hit. And we need to make sure that we're removing the sources of pollution. We know that whether it's toxic waste, what we call the peaker plants, those are the gas-fired plants in New York that surge on at high times of need, or just locating sanitation garages and other things that contribute to asthma. There's so many ways that we've disproportionately impacted communities of color with environmental hazards. And this is also part of my 15-minute plan. It's not just what you should have within 15 minutes of your front door, it's what you shouldn't have as well, and making sure that we're removing those hazards and really putting environmental justice at the forefront of our work on climate.
Question from Kelly Bethea for Shaun Donovan.
Sure. So I wanted to go back to what you do best, given your record, which is housing, specifically with income restrictive housing. For those who don't know, the way that I categorize it, you have like three groups. You have those who actually fall within the income restrictions. You have those who are definitely over the income restrictions and can afford the housing as priced. And then you have those people in the middle who are over the income restrictions by like $1 and can't afford to live where they need to live in order to do what they need to do. So my question to you is, how do you rectify people essentially not impoverishing themselves in order to keep housing? Because there's a problem. I know there's been issues in DC in which you have income restricted housing where if you make just $1 over, you can lose the housing that you earned by way of income restrictions, but you can't afford to live where you are without that that safeguard in place. So how do you rectify being in that third group of people?
Trying to think.
Yeah, so first of all, one of the things I did as HUD secretary were push for ways that we could be a little more flexible to ensure that you didn't have that kind of perverse impact on people. You know, earning an extra dollar and losing your housing assistance is crazy, right? But what we also need to be doing is ensuring that we're creating real opportunities for folks to save as they earn more as well. One of the programs I'm proudest of that we really expanded dramatically when I was HUD secretary is called Family Self-Sufficiency. And basically the idea was, as a resident of public housing, a resident of other kinds of affordable housing is earning more, instead of just taking a big chunk of that towards the rent because they're earning more, put it in a savings account, allow them to build equity that goes to buying their first home. As I said a moment ago, there's nothing more powerful than the equity you can build through home ownership and wealth building. And that's something that we ought to make available to everyone. And it's something that I led as housing secretary as an important piece working for President Obama that ensured we were allowing folks to build wealth and not have the kind of perverse impacts that you're talking about. So that full range of programs, a little more flexibility, but also the incentives to save, be able to buy a home and then build wealth in the long term are critical to doing it as well.
Next question, Ben.
Yeah, Mr. Donovan, Andrew Yang is under some serious fire today because of his statement on what's happening with Israel and Palestine, particularly because it was endorsed by Ted Cruz, Stephen Miller, and I think even Donald Trump Jr. got in on it. How do you distinguish yourself from his position and your thoughts on that particular position that he put forth on Twitter?
Yeah, well, look, we should all be horrified at the loss of life that we've seen of Palestinian parents and children. And I will say, as a father of two young men, I am particularly horrified to see the loss of children in innocent bystanders to this. And what I would say is this is not for political haymaking. This is tragedy. And as someone who's worked side by side with President Biden, as someone who knows well our Secretary of State, and I would just urge everyone, particularly our leadership in Washington, to work to de-escalate this situation as quickly as possible and make sure that we're saving lives. Every human life is of value, and I think that has to come before politics here.
Absolutely.
All right, Shaun Donovan, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Good luck in your run.
Thanks so much, Roland. It's great to see you again. Great to be with you. Feels like old times.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends, go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.
Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible.
Art Chang is trying to become the next mayor of New York City. We've already had a couple of candidates on. He joins us right now. Art, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. That, by the way, that turkey looks amazing.
First of all, but I can only come here one time when I come home because it destroys any meal plan that you are on. And so glad to have you here. Art, first and foremost, it's a huge group of people who are running for mayor of New York City. How do you break through?
Well, let's explain what the job of the mayor is. I mean, I think that's a really critical piece here that no one's really talking about. I mean, New York City is one of the most important places in the entire world. Its economy alone would put it in the top 15 of all countries if New York City were a country. The budget for the city is larger than all but 4 states. If New York City were a corporation, we'd be in the top 35 by budget, and we'd be in the top 15 by the number of employees. New York City is incredibly important. And so who do you want to actually manage this, right? Is it someone who actually knows city government? Yes, you do, and that would be me. Or state government, who has actually made change happen in government, but also somebody who can actually work across to the private sector, who has a long track record in the private sector and working in many areas that are important to the city, like technology, like education, and like, small business. And I think I'm very uniquely positioned among all those areas.
But again, now you're dealing with money, you're dealing with name ID, you're dealing with all of those different things that go into it. But also, y'all have ranked voting, and so that means that it's not always about getting that first vote; it's getting the other votes as well. And so, what is your strategy to build your way to victory that way?
Absolutely. So, my goal is not to be number one and solely number one, but to appeal to a broad group of people who are fed up with the way it has been. We have a few folks who are running who have been career politicians. We have a current mayor who is a great disappointment, who has been a career politician, so we see what happens with that. We have a number of really fine people who have spent their entire careers in government, so we'll see if that works. And then we have a couple people who spent their careers only in the private sector. We'll see if that works. So there's a chance here not to be the number one person, to be the big man, but to actually be the person who is ranked number 2 or 3 across as many RCV ballots as possible. And that's really the path to victory. And I think there's a very clear lane for me. Undecided New York City voters, depending on the poll, are from 25 to 50% of all voters, which say to me that they are dissatisfied with the current choices.
Last question for you, Art. Look, you got about 6 weeks. Weeks. And so, how are you going to be pushing in these 6 weeks to get to as many sectors as possible? But specifically, what are you going to say to African American voters why you should be their pick?
Well, I'm obviously not African American. But the one thing I am is I have an unusual story. I was born in Jim Crow Atlanta in 1963 at a time when Asian immigration was illegal. I moved to Akron, Ohio, to an all-white school district where I felt racism on the street, and I grew up in a domestic violence household. I lived with the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement is what enabled Asians to become citizens in this country, to forge a path forward, to watch what happened, and to follow in the footsteps of great Black people, great Black leaders who practiced, peaceful disobedience and protested and found political power and forged a path to make a difference, not just for themselves, but for everybody else, because we know the civil rights movement didn't just enable Asians to immigrate to the U.S. The civil rights movement also paved the way for women's equality and gender equality. You know, it is a basis upon which equality is formed in this country. In my own experience, I've lived in New York City since 1985. I've lived my entire time here in Brooklyn for all but 2 years. And I am very, very familiar with all the communities that Black people live in the city. And I'm very familiar with hardship. I've been through that hardship with racism and violence, but I've also been through that hardship just in the life that I've had here in New York. You know, I know the feeling of not being able to pay the rent, of not having enough money for food, of losing everything and having to lift myself up off the ground. And that's what we have to do here over and over again. And I bring a unique set of tools from technology and business and technology with the goal to restore equity for everybody. I'm the only candidate here who has actually started multiple small businesses in this city. And so when I know what the importance of economic growth and the connection to education is, you know, for everybody here in this city.
All right, Art Chang, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much for joining us here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Good luck.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have, you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it. Please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Folks, we have been, of course, having numerous candidates who are running for mayor of New York City on the show. That is going to be coming up real soon, next month. Joining us right now is Isaac Wright Jr., who's running for mayor. Isaac, glad to have you here. Look at the latest polls. You look at who's leading, Eric Adams, Andrew Yang. How are you going to make the case to vault to the top of the leaderboard?
Well, you know, Roland, and thank you for having me. One of the things that we've learned about polls in recent history is that they've slowly, over time, have gotten more and more out of touch with the public. Of course, you know, when any candidate is dealing with in modern times actually for a very long time is the issue of money. There is a sense that media, they want to follow the money. There is a sense in politics that the person with the most money is the guy that you want to jump on the bandwagon with, but that's not the sense of the people, and I think what's happening with politics today, and I was just watching the segment on Donald Trump, is that there was insurrection, but the ultimate power is in the people, and that's why Joe Biden is president, because ultimately the power in this country is in the people, and I think it's the same thing that's happening now in New York City. I think the power in New York City is not in the money, the power is in the people. And I think the people are going to speak loud and clear come June 22nd. So how are you going to connect with them? What are you saying to voters why they should pick you? Well, there's a number of reasons. Well, one of the things that is very clear with voters is you got to look at, how have your lives changed election after election after election. what is these leaders have done? What have they done election after election that have changed your lives? What promises that they've made that was really directed at you that they've actually kept? There's a number of policy issues that I have from new jobs for young entrepreneurs, kids coming out of high school that may not want to go to college but have these great ideas. And they want to start their new businesses. You know, the city's going to get together. They're going to partner with them, and they're going to provide funding so these young kids can start businesses. You know, there's public works programs in New York City. The infrastructure in New York City has been failing for a very long time, and I think billions of dollars need to be thrown into public work program that will create thousands of jobs. There's issues with New York City being, you know, and it's always been that when New York City is the richest city in the world. There's more billionaires that live in New York City than anywhere else in the world. And so there has to be a time when New York City looks at the ingredients it has, brings these ingredients together to help bring New York City back on its feet for the good of the people of New York City. And I think a lot of these things that's happening in New York City right now, a lot of the promises that the candidates have been made are just promises that have been repackaged from promises of old. If you look at what Einstein said, and I think is very significant here, you know, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
But what specifically is your agenda? What specifically are you running on to say this is why you should elect me? What issues?
I have three marquee issues. One is housing. And if you look at New York City has the biggest housing population in the country. NYCHA houses over 500,000 residences. And if you look at that from a population standpoint, New York City is bigger than the city of Atlanta, the city of Miami, the city of Oakland, California. Think about that for a second. Think about driving into a city where no one owns their own home. And I think NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, they've been serial landlords for several decades. People are born in these complexes and they die in these complexes. And one of the marquee issues for me is to change NYCHA, to convert NYCHA from a serial landlord to a conduit for home ownership. I think every one of these individuals in these low-income housing should have the option of buying their own home, should have the option of being able to leverage that home so that they can send their kids to college, so that they can start their own new businesses, so that they can probably sell out and find a better place to live. But at some point, New York City has to change that diagram. They have to empower the people that have been encircled in.
So housing is one issue. Other two.
Excuse me.
You said housing is one. Other two issues.
Housing is one. The other issue obviously is criminal justice reform. As you know, there's been a serious problem across the country with criminal justice, with policing, with the militarization of police. It's something that has been reaching its apex. It's been bubbling for decades, especially in the Black and brown communities. And it's reached its apex because of social media. New York City has a problem with that. And I think one of the things that needs to happen is that there needs to be a disconnect that needs to be torn down, and a reconnect between what the community sees in the police and what the police sees in themselves. And I think that's been a failure of mayors in the past. And one of the things, and you know, my background speaks for itself. One of the things that is at the forefront of my background is my relationship with law enforcement. I believe one of the things that has to happen, and that's one of my marquee issues, is to bring law enforcement and the community together, create New York City NYPD as a blueprint for what it means to protect and serve. And that's one of the things that I'm going to do.
So criminal justice is number two. The last issue. What's number three?
Number three is a very, very serious issue, and that's something that's going to be coming soon. Right now, because of COVID, you have tens of thousands of people who are going to be facing eviction, who are going to be facing foreclosure, and something has to happen. We've been pushing that ball down the road with moratoriums, but at some point, the banks and the landlords are going to call on that money that's being owed. And we're going to run into a very significant housing crisis in New York City. One of the things that I propose that is a marquee issue is a forgiveness program, a program where everybody that's been affected by COVID because of COVID, they're in eviction, they're behind in their rent, or they're in foreclosure, to enter them into a forgiveness program ran by the city. And that program will not only forgive that back debt, but allow them to start anew and also make the landlords and the mortgage companies whole.
All right, then. Isaac Wright, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much. For many folks who watched the show For Life on ABC that was recently canceled, that inspiration for that TV show is based upon your life, getting your law degree while you were in prison. And so we certainly good luck in your race for the New York City mayor.
Thank you very much, Roland.
All right, thanks so much.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Racial injustice is a scourge on this nation, and the Black community has felt it for generations. We have an obligation to do something about it. Whether it's canceling student debt, increasing the minimum wage, or investing in Black-owned businesses, the Black community deserves so much better. I'm Nina Turner, and I'm running for Congress to do something about it.
You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible.
Folks, next month, New York City is going to have their mayoral election, and it's a whole bunch of folks in the race. We've had several candidates on already. Our next guest, who is running for mayor, has served as a city as a police officer, and now he wants to be the next mayor of that city. He's running neck and neck in the polls with Andrew Yang. Eric Adams joins us right now on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Glad to have you back on. You were on before, Borough President there in Brooklyn. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. First of all, how is it going? You're broadcasting from a car, so clearly you must be on the road out there trying to make it happen.
First of all, I just love your unfiltered show, because we need real talk right now. And let me just plant a seed, Brother Roland, which is crucial. My campaign is in the philosophy and theory of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. All over the country, New York included, all we do is pull people out of the river of crime, homelessness, lack of education, all those issues we're seeing. There's no desire to stop folks from falling in the river because we have profitized and made money out of pulling people out of the river. And that's the difference between Eric Adams and everyone else that is running.
What is your core message to African Americans in this city? Why should they and others be voting for you to be the next mayor of New York City?
It's about ending inequalities, and those inequalities are created based on agencies within our cities. And this is not just a New York issue that I'm fighting for. It's a national issue. I'm going to get it right in New York, and it's going to cascade across the entire country. Cities are made up of agencies, and our agencies are creating the inequities and really the injustices throughout this entire country. Just look at the fact in New York City, 65% of Black and brown children are not don't meet proficiency every year. If you don't educate, you will incarcerate. 80% of the men and women at Rikers Island, our jail, don't have a high school diploma or equivalency diploma. I know how to take our city upstream, and I'm not just a cop. I was arrested by police officers and brutalized, and civil rights leaders asked me to go into policing to fight from within. I started 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, and I was a civil rights leader in the police department and led the reform that you're seeing across this entire country right now.
So when you talk about economics, New York, Wall Street, capital there as well. When we talk about African Americans, businesses, there are some that do well, but the bottom line is there's so many people who are being left out. How are you going to make sure that every city department, that those dollars that are flowing, the billions of dollars in that city, don't just go to folks who don't look like you and I?
Well, let's be clear. Let's first start with the dollars that are coming from taxpayer dollars. We spend $22.5 billion a year. in goods and service and procurements. Yet much of those dollars are leaving the city and we don't see it recycled in our small businesses. I'm going to turn that game around. Number one, I'm going to hire a chief diversity officer when I walk into City Hall. Number two, I'm telling all of my procurement officers in every agency, you ought to hand in your letter of resignation, and I will make the determination if I'm going to move on that. Number three, which is extremely important, that's not being done in New York at all, I'm going to put in place a real-time system where we can monitor our agencies in real time of how are you reaching the goals that I set up for you in procurements of goods and services, and we're going to zero in on those communities that were hardest hit by COVID virus. We will reach our numbers. We will judge them monthly. And if you're not reaching the numbers that I expect of you, I'm going to move on that letter of resignation and put a person in that understands the mission that Mayor Adams has set out for our city.
One of the issues that also comes up, education. A lot of drama that took place. A lot of folks are upset with these high-end or tough to get into schools that have seen significant drop in black enrollment. Mayor Bill de Blasio waded into that. We had him on this show, and people were not happy with him at all. You have a new head of schools there as well. You also have folks, you have parents who are clamoring for more charter schools. Albany is saying, nope, we're going to put a cap on it. So, education. What is your education plan for New York City?
Brother, thanks so much for that, Roland. Let me tell you something. We get caught up in the conversation and not the education. Adults are battling over something while children and babies are failing all the time. Education is wrong in New York City and across America. I sat down on my campaign trail. I met with pediatricians and neurologists. We're so busy looking at what children learn and not how they learn. The first classroom is in a mother's womb. If that mother's not receiving the right folic acid, iron, iodine, the right nutrition, that baby could be born with irreversible learning disabilities in some cases. Not all, but some cases. So what is Eric Adams going to do in education? I'm going to focus on every mother having a doula so they can understand the first 1,000 days of life, how it impacts on brain development. Then I'm going to make sure that we bring back the joy of learning into our schools. Children can't be just academically smart. They must be emotionally intelligent and well-rounded, their full personhood. We're going to connect our careers with the curriculum. And I'm not focusing on just those 8 schools that you were talking about. Those are the specialized high schools. 8 schools. We spend 90% of our energy on those 8 schools instead of looking at the over 500 schools that are failing our children every day. I told you the number, 65% of our children don't meet proficiency, black and brown children. 30% of the men and women who are incarcerated right now, Roland, are dyslexic. So why aren't we doing dyslexia screening? 55% have a learning disability. Why aren't we doing learning disabilities identification to give the support to parents so they don't end up incarcerated? Because we are downstream. I'm going to take my educational system upstream, everything from nutritional-based healthy food to learning how the skills they need to leaning into vocational training, pathway to college. We need to change how we are educating our children. Right now, we're just schooling and not educating. Extended school hours, universal tutorial for every child that needs it. Looking at our summer months so we don't have the summer slides. We're doing the wrong education because we're still following an agrarian calendar and an outdated method that is not prepared for the deep into the 21st century.
Well, look, we certainly look forward to see what happens in this race. I know you have to go. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And look forward to having you back on the show.
Thank you. Take care, Roland. Stay unfiltered.
Yes, sir. All day, every day.
Take care.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. All right, folks. That was, again, Eric Adams running for the mayor of New York City. Hey, to the other candidates, Maya Wiley, I've been trying to reach you. Andrew Yang, we've been trying to reach you. Let's see, Scott Stringer. Who are some of the other folks, some of the top candidates? We've been trying to reach all of them. We ain't heard from none of them. Hitting y'all on Twitter, DMing, calling. So I'm just saying.
Just saying. Y'all might want to holler back. Folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Racial injustice is a scourge on this nation, and the Black community has felt it for generations. We have an obligation to do something about it. Whether it's canceling student debt, increasing the minimum wage, or investing in Black-owned businesses, the Black community deserves so much better. I'm Nina Turner, and I'm running for Congress to do something about it.
You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible.
We've talked about public officials and why they matter, why it's important who is in office. Well, that's also the case in New York City. We've been talking to a number of mayoral candidates. Right now, we want to talk to Kathryn Garcia, who is also running to be the next CEO of New York City. Glad to have you on Roland Martin Unfiltered, Kathryn.
I'm so thrilled to be with you this evening.
First, going to ask you this here. I'd love for you to comment on what's happening here. Look, you want to be mayor of New York City. If elected, what would you say to your Republican counterpart? What would you say to the mayor of Tulsa when the people here are saying you need to create a victims compensation fund for this community and not have the city be focusing on tourism dollars and being able to generate revenue? What would you say to him?
Yeah, the thing that I would say to him is you have to actually address what happened 100 years ago in a real way, in partnership with communities. And if they are saying, I need you to self-fund some of these things and make sure that this community is really taken care of, that's what you need to do. Your job when you're an elected official is to be listening to your electorate about what they need so that they can have a better life.
Speaking on that, that's one of the things that folks in New York City have been saying. You're running to replace Bill de Blasio as the next mayor of New York City. And so what would you say to African Americans there in New York City? New York City is the largest collection of black folks outside of Africa. What would you say to them as to why they should be voting for you to be mayor of New York?
Yes, and my brother is one of those members of the African American community because I was adopted, as was he. What I would say is I am about delivering for communities. I'm about making sure that this is a more livable, more affordable city where everyone has economic opportunity in a very intentional way, and that we are making investments in community, whether or not that is free childcare so that women who have taken such a hit in this pandemic can get back to work, whether or not that's affordable housing, new parks, taking care of the current ones in all communities equally, making sure that there's education that is funded in the same way across the city. But the real piece of it is not only my vision for New York of the future, but also the fact that I have a track record about getting it done.
And so one of the things that is critically important that we've been talking about on this show with our segment, Where's Our Money, is a lack of investment that goes to black firms. What will you do to ensure that African Americans are receiving their fair share of the billions of dollars being spent on legal contracts, accounting contracts, investing money in black banks, ensuring the black-owned media in New York are getting city advertising contracts, really looking at race equity and how the billions of dollars being spent at City Hall go to a wide variety of people, and again, to ensure African Americans in New York get their fair share?
We have a $90+ billion budget. I mean, we'll decide in June what next year looks like. And that means that we have to be doing investments in black businesses, and particularly black women-owned businesses. They really don't get a fair share of those contract dollars, but making sure that we're also helping them grow, helping them to go from small companies to big companies, and continue to be profitable going forward. And the way that you do that is identifying the opportunity for them to participate and really challenging every single buyer in the city of New York about where their numbers are.
I want to go to my panel. Questions for Kathryn Garcia. Brittany Lewis, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I would love to learn. Can you guys hear me? Awesome. I would love to learn a little bit more about your stance on policing. Do you believe in defunding the police?
My feeling is that we have to have a police department that is keeping everyone safe, regardless of the color of their skin. We are going to have to deal with the fact that we have a very large uptick in gun violence, as well as in hate crime and subway violence. That means we need a police force that is working, particularly around the investigative on the gun violence piece, and that we all feel safe regardless of the color of our skin. But that means reform. You know, you get what you measure. If you are measuring community engagement, you get community engagement. If you measure arrests, that's what you get. And I know what good, transparent, tough discipline looks like. I've done it as a uniform manager. But we also need to make investments in things like cure violence, diversion programs from our criminal justice system, making sure people have a home, not a shelter, but a home, so that they can thrive. And then we're also dealing with the issues of food insecurity.
Next question, Michael Imhotep.
All right, Commissioner Garcia, thanks for coming on today. I know Roland mentioned some issues pertaining to the African-American community, but do you have a African-American agenda to address these issues? And if so, what are 3 or 4 top issues or top items on that African-American agenda?
And foremost is about education and making it so that 4-year-olds no longer take a test, and that we are giving gifted and talented resources in every single school, that we are expanding high schools and using admissions that look at your grade point average. So if you're the best in any school, there are no bad schools out there. We want to make sure that you are getting the best education going forward. But it's also about investing in our small businesses and supporting them and supporting those entrepreneurs. We actually saw some decent data recently about new small Black businesses in the city of New York. And you know what was driving it? The fact that people got stimulus checks. They had enough capital to get them over. And we can do that at the city of New York as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mustafa, your question for Kathryn Garcia.
Commissioner, good to be with you. Have you given any thought to addressing the environmental injustices that still continue to happen in New York City? Asthma rates are about 10% across the city. We know that in African American and Latinx areas that the rates are even higher, and we understand that when folks are dealing with that significant public health condition, that it extracts opportunities for education, folks being able to go to work, a number of other things. So how will you address the environmental injustices happening there in New York?
And I am very aware of the environmental injustices that have gone on. You know, I banned number 6 fuel oil, particularly problematic in Upper Manhattan and the South Bronx in our asthma belts. You can see the difference in the air quality. Also making sure that we had waste equity, that there weren't transfer stations in only poor brown and Black neighborhoods, and capping those permits. But it is also about creating a more livable city. And by that is, how do we green those neighborhoods, change that air quality, make sure that their housing stock is safe. This is what changes the health of people on the ground. But I also have a robust agenda around ensuring that they have access to health care.
All right, then. Well, Kathryn Garcia, we certainly appreciate you joining us at Roland Martin Unfiltered. Good luck. It's a lot of y'all running, and so it's going to be a tight face race to the end. And also, New York, you have ranked choice, correct?
Ranked choice, yes. It's going to be a totally different race this year. So it's you get to pick your top 5.
Top 5, got it. So I absolutely got it. Well, I appreciate it. Good luck. Then we'll see what happens next month.
Thank you much. Great to be on.
Folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Racial injustice is a scourge on this nation, and the black community has felt it for generations. We have an obligation to do something about it. Whether it's canceling student debt, increasing the minimum wage, or investing in black-owned businesses, the black community deserves so much better. I'm Nina Turner, and I'm running for Congress to do something about it.